Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 193rd Right and Left Discussion Forum. We normally hold our televised discussions twice monthly on a variety of political topics. But in the spirit of the holiday season, we have asked each of our panelists to share their favorite Christmas stories. Leading off with our first Christmas stories is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. Then Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, excuse me, a retired senior research chemist, Joe Gaines, former faculty member of the University of Akron, and Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council and retired math teacher from Wadsworth High. Bryan, I'm looking forward to hearing your Christmas stories.
Well, thank you, John. I think one of the reasons why I suggested something of this nature is that when you look at all the wisdom that we have on this panel, I think we probably have close to 350 Christmases experiences between us. And there's got to be some wisdom and some funny, maybe comical stories that come out of Christmas. So I think I'll start with one of the sort of a little funny. In our family tradition, the kids get to open up one gift on Christmas Eve. And one Christmas when my oldest boy, Mitch, I think he was probably 8 or 9, he wanted an iguana really bad. I mean, he just, that was part of his Santa letter, you know, every time he talked about Christmas, it was, he wanted this iguana, he wanted a lizard of some sort. So in true fashion, we wrapped up a lizard book, and Christmas Eve came around, and he opened up that particular gift, and it was an iguana book. And you could tell he was just crestfallen. I mean, he just thought,
because he got a book instead of a lizard.
He got a book instead of a lizard. But what he didn't know was we had gone out and purchased this little iguana. It was probably 6 to 8 inches long. It was just a little fella. And we had a little aquarium set up in a part of the house where, you know, obviously he would never go to. So the next morning, that was one of his last gifts that he got. And it was sort of like that Christmas story, Red Ryder, you know, wasn't sure if he's going to get anything. And so he got this little iguana, and he named it Yoshi. But the funny part about it was, after he got it, who knew that iguanas were one of the biggest carriers of salmonella? So we heard from everybody that we knew. Then when Mitch would at school, he went and told his teacher he got an iguana. He wanted to take it in to show him. He said, no, you can't, because iguanas, I mean, they're the biggest carrier of salmonella. And if anybody were to hold that, then they would have to, clean off their hands and all that kind of stuff. So we got a big laugh out of that. I think Yoshi lasted about 6 months. He took real good care of him, but little iguanas, they don't live. They're kind of like little turtles. So that was that's kind of one of those little funny ones. Most of our Christmases, the kids were pretty set on, the normal things that little kids get. One of the things that I remember most about Christmas and why certain Christmases stand out is that when I was in a position to serve others, those are really the Christmases that meant more to me, was that I was able to help someone or make someone's Christmas a little better. And that always helped me, when you're growing up and you're comparing gifts. I grew up with a family. I had 3 younger brothers and an older sister. It was not uncommon to have one gift for all the boys. And you got the staples, you knew you were going to get socks and underwear, probably a new pair of shoes, something that you could go back to school and wear. But when it came to toys, there really wasn't a lot of toys. I think one year we got a soccer table. That was for all the boys. We got this little soccer table. One year it was a football. But when we as a family would go and serve another family that maybe was a little less fortunate than us, those Christmases really stood out to me. And there have been plenty of times that As a family and as an individual, as a couple, we've tried to help others at Christmas time because it can be a real stressful time for some. So I guess I'll end with one of my favorite stories, and I'll make it real brief. I tell my kids this, pretty much every year. Most of you know I served a 2-year mission for my church on and around the Navajo Indian Reservation, and it was my first Christmas away from home. And my gift from my parents didn't come. I was feeling homesick. I just felt like I was isolated. There wasn't much, we could do. My companion, who had been out on his mission for some time, had received all of his gifts, and there I sat. Well, he suggested that we go out and serve some of those people that we were working with. And we went to a home of one of the families we were working with. A little boy came to the door. He was so excited to show me his gift. And here it was, a little plastic car. And boy, it hit me with a bolt of lightning. I had one of those epiphanies, if you will, that I had a lot to be grateful for and a lot to be thankful for.
Yeah.
And here this little guy was so excited to get this little plastic car for Christmas. And, it just brought home to me how important it is to be grateful and to be thankful for a lot of blessings, and just grateful for this time of year where we can reach out and help others and serve. And so those are several of the Christmases that I remember the most, some funny, some more serious, but the ones that were the best were usually the ones that we were serving other people.
Well, thank you for those memories, Brian.
You're welcome.
Ron.
Wonderful story, Brian. Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
my tale's not a warm fuzzy exactly. It was quite stressful and quite possibly tragic, but it had a happy ending. It was 1965. We decided to leave Wadsworth and go to New Jersey, a little town in New Jersey, to visit my wife's parents because we had a baby who was 2 months old, and his grandparents hadn't met him yet. So we take off in the car on the Christmas Eve day, and there was my wife and I and my 2 children. Stephen was 2 months old and David was 16, and my sister-in-law, who lived in Cleveland, picked her up. So we're tooling along. It's getting toward evening, late afternoon, and we come out of the last of those infamous tunnels on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and it's snowing. It's been snowing for some time, apparently. The roadway is quite covered, although the highway crews have been out and we're busily plowing, and there was enough traffic that there were well-beaten ruts in the road. It wasn't a big problem, and we had snow tires. So we get to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, get off there, and it was snowing pretty badly. By this time, it's dark, and we stopped at a home of my aunt and uncle who lived in the area. Unfortunately, turned out they were visiting my mother 100 miles away in the opposite direction. So we stopped and had dinner. This whole trip is about a 7-hour driving time. It's going to take us 9 to 10 with the stops you have to make with children in the car and all that. So after dinner, we 3 adults tried to decide what to do. It cleared off. The snow had stopped. The roads were all plowed. We knew that US 22, which was our next route, was a straight shot to the Pennsylvania border. Was and still is a major artery east and west for the middle part of the state of Pennsylvania. And we thought, okay, well, we'll give that a shot. Bad decision. We get about halfway and we come to, and the road, it had begun to snow again and the roadway was getting covered. So we come to an upgrade and get stalled behind a whole line of traffic, which was also stopped. And the line of traffic accumulated behind us. I could see in the rearview mirror the lights of the approaching snowplow. When it came barreling up the road, it threw up a 3-foot wall of snow between us and the cleared part of the highway, clearly up to the level of the windows of the car. No way to move. So I don't know how long we sat there. We ran the engine occasionally with the downwind side of the window open. And of course I hadn't packed any snow shovel, but snow tires, I'm fine. So eventually, little David says at one point, "Daddy, I want to go home now." We could all kind of agree with that. But eventually I saw behind me that a driver of a semi was trying to force his way through that wall of snow, which he was successful at doing. So all the cars behind him left through the gap, and then those of us above it backed up. And a good Samaritan had his car behind the gap and the lights on and was waving people back and directing traffic. So we got out of that. And as soon as we got to the vicinity of Allentown, which wasn't too far away, roads were clear. As soon as we came to an exit with a motel, we stopped and stayed the night. And of course, called the folks in New Jersey. And the next morning, Christmas Day, dawned bright and clear and sunshiny, and we made the remaining 25 or so miles to the little town of New Jersey and had a wonderful Christmas and no problem coming home. So it's kind of a
So all
cautionary
well
tale.
that ends well. Huh?
All guns that ends well. It was, it potentially could have been very, very serious, but young folks don't have the, with age comes wisdom. Sometimes age comes alone, but no internet, no cell phones, so you take your chances. And did I mention we had snow tires? Didn't help.
Yes, you did. Yeah, Joe, are you going to tell us about Christmas in Steubenville?
Yes, they actually do have Christmas in Steubenville.
Ah,
Well, what I wanted to say was that back in the 1950s, I lived in downtown Steubenville, downtown. And well, I had a bike. I loved the bike. But I was downtown, so I could ride on the sidewalk. I didn't have to worry about riding on the roads or anything like that. And I was riding my bike one day, very slow, because I couldn't ride fast. I just wasn't a very fast rider. And I still had my training wheels on. So I didn't really ride a bike. I was riding a bike with training wheels. A bunch of guys from my neighborhood came around, started to play, and started pushing me down the hill, pushing me around the corner, pushing me so fast that I ran into an older lady and knocked her down. She was crying. I hurt her pretty bad. So I went and I told my parents. My dad said, get in the car. He got in the car, waited a few minutes. He drove up to that lady's house. He said, now get out and give her this. He gave me some money. It actually was my money that he had taken from me.
sounds like my dad.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, I went up to her house, knocked on the door. She came to the door. She was very nice. And I gave her the money and I said, I'm very sorry for what I did. She said, well, it wasn't your fault, was it? I said, well, I'm the one that did it. In other words, I was learning about responsibility. And that's what my dad wanted me to learn. I was responsible. I might not have been the reason why it happened, but I was responsible. If I hadn't been doing certain things, it would never happen. She gave me a little kiss on the head. And that was that. Back home. Then about 1960, my dad had finished building our house up in the Pleasant Hill, which is the country. And because of that, my bike was no longer any good around that area because I couldn't ride on sidewalks. There was no sidewalks.
Yeah.
So I needed another bike. And I didn't have one. But we would get together with the family a lot. And on Sunday night, especially, everybody came home on Christmas Eve one night, went downstairs, and there's a bicycle there. It was old. It wasn't a new bike. It was an older bike. It was black. And my dad said, here, this is your Christmas gift. And what he did was he got this old bike from a friend. He fixed it up a little bit, repainted it and stuff, fixed up the wheels. And then he gave it to me. That was my Christmas gift. I never forgot that. I learned a lot as a kid.
Yeah. Very good. What was it like in Barberton, Patty?
Yes, that's where I grew up.
I know.
I remember the first sign of Christmas was when Mr. Jingling was showing up on television in the commercials from Hallie's second or seventh floor. That was a big thing. The next thing that the family always did, and I remember fondly, was driving into Akron to see the store windows at O'Neill's and Polsky's. And they always, Polsky's was more traditional. I always liked O'Neill's because theirs were more whimsical, but you would go up and you'd walk along the streets, with hundreds of other people just peering at the windows because they were so wonderful. The next thing that we would do that would bring you up to Christmas was to go to Marshall's department store, which is where everybody in Barberton shopped. And you went to the basement where the toy department was, and there you visited with Santa Claus every year. So we always saw Santa at Marshall's department store. And then the next thing you get to see Santa again when you went to St. Augustine's for the Christmas party. And that was always my first gift. And I really enjoyed that. I look forward to that. Now the gifts were usually like candy canes or something nominal like that. But, that's the way it goes. Then we would finally get to Christmas Eve. And I was fortunate to have my grandparents that lived right next door to me. So on Christmas Eve, my mom and dad and all of my brothers and sisters and all of my cousins and all of the aunts and uncles would go over to my grandma and grandpa's for dinner on Christmas Eve. Now, I love this. My grandma was such a wonderful cook, and she made the absolute best pies in the world. And you would wait just to get that pie on Christmas Eve. The only problem was she made mincemeat pies. Now, I absolutely, totally detest mincemeat. However, my grandmother's crust was so good that you would take that slice of mincemeat pie and eat the crust around it just to taste that flavor. And I still remember that. That's one of my fondest memories of my grandmother. Then when we were finished with dinner, we would go home, which was right next door, and magically all our Christmas gifts were there. Of course, magically my father was not there for a lot of the time, so we never quite knew what he was doing, but Santa would come and we would be able to open our gifts on Christmas Eve because you had to spend Christmas morning getting ready to go to church. So we always opened gifts on Christmas Eve. As I got older, traditions changed. And I remember when I was in college, there was a group of 12 of us, and we were all high school friends. And every Christmas, we did this for quite a few years, we would go around to all of our parents' houses and Christmas carol. And then they would invite us in for drinks and snacks. And we always started at Mrs. Maven's house. And she had this huge spread of food that we just set up. And then we would go to the Muffets and to the Fishers and to the Rowlands and all of these homes. We always ended up at my ex's house. But it was really a lot of fun. I still remember Mrs. Fisher, who was from Scotland, made the best shortbread. And it was just a really nice tradition for all of us to do for so many years. The one year was funny because we would dress up. My ex used to dress up as Santa, and we were driving home after the whole evening, and a car had wrecked in front of us, and my ex went up to help him, and the guy was a little bit, I think he was a little bit intoxicated. So he was a tad bit surprised when Santa Claus came to his rescue on Christmas. Moving up to the future, a Christmas tradition that I see in my family that I'm actually very proud of. I have nothing to do with it, but I'm proud of my family members. My sister and brother-in-law live in Plain Township, and they have a daughter that has special needs. Katie is autistic, and she's a really huge fan of Disney. So, maybe 8-10 years ago, Jim bought an inflatable for the yard that was Disney oriented. Well, since that time, he has over 100 inflatables that he sets up in his yard, and he has a huge yard because he has properties on both sides that he has, and he has dubbed it Katie Land. And they get hundreds of people that come by to visit. They have it set up so nicely that you can, there's places you can walk on the path of all these inflatables and get pictures by the 20-foot snowman or by the 18-foot Santa Claus. They have a box out front where you can drop off your letter to Santa, and Santa will write back to you. Every kid that writes a letter to Santa gets a letter back to them. For the last few years, Santa actually appears at Katieland, where he meets outside of a beautiful setting there for him, and he gives each child a gift. And one of the reasons they started this, asking Santa to show up, was that a couple of years ago with COVID, Jim was afraid that some kids weren't going to know where to go to see Santa, to relive that memory that we had in the basement of Marshall's visiting Santa. The kids could come outside and visit with Santa safely and have a wonderful moment. If any of you are interested in a really nice Christmas drive, down to Katieland is a wonderful place to go to take your family, especially small children.
Where is that?
It's in Plain Township. The
Where is that?
address, by Canton. It's part of
Okay.
Canton. Yes, it's just a 30-minute drive. Actually, if you go on to, I know there's pictures of it on YouTube and so forth. If you go to YouTube or Google, you can find the address. I think it's Norridge Drive, and but just look up Katieland.
K-A-D-Y?
Katie.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and my in-laws, my brother-in-law and my sister are really special people. Katie is autistic. They're very active with the Autism Foundation. Also, Jim coaches probably 10 different sports for Special Olympics. They're extremely active with that. They're just what you would call good people. So.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Ron, do you remember, Ron and I were in the Presbyterian Church, which is a startup church in Wadsworth. We met in the Masonic Temple on High Street. And at Christmas time, the elders would take Christmas gifts, mainly clothes and some toys and all that to families in Wadsworth that were in need.
Right. Yes.
Pardon me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff I forget, but
Well, I was never really comfortable doing that. I remember the first house we went to one year that, carrying our baskets full of stuff and into this house. I mean, it was really bad. You could see the basement through the kitchen floor. I don't know if you were on that trip or not, but and as I was walking up the sidewalk toward the house, I thought, we're pretty darn self-righteous here. We're doing this wonderful charitable thing at Christmas time. What are we extracting from the people that are in that house? And I remember feeling very self-conscious walking into the house, and the woman of the house was sort of officious about it all. She said, just put the stuff in there, And we did, and we stood around and chatted for a little bit. The kids were kind of glad to see things, but I often wondered about that kind of charity and whether or not you're taking more than you're giving.
isn't that a fine line, about all that? And I never felt very comfortable with that either. And I've never been very good as being a deacon in my church. I've done a lot of, in the various churches I've been over the years, I've done a lot of things in terms of running the operation. I was in Danbury, Connecticut. I was the chairman of the missions committee. We administered several $100,000 a year in aid to places, but mostly outside the community. We just, and if you could write a check, that was good. That was easy to do. It's difficult. Bryan, what your community does is outstanding, really, to go out and talk with folks and meet with them and share your beliefs and your concepts. It's very difficult to do. Very tough to do, and probably only young people are comfortable doing that, because they're brash and confident. so that's a great thing. So.
Well, in thinking about this show, I was thinking about my own memories. which I'm probably not going to be able to talk about.
That time
I
of year,
woke up with a horrible cold this morning. And anyway, carry on. I can't seem to make it here.
Eddie, you're remembering your grandmother's pies. My mother was, and both grandmothers were good bakers, but my mom was good too. But Dad and I, by the time I was about 10 or 12 years old, my dad and I had a tradition. We go to midnight mass, come home, and between the two of us consume a pumpkin pie.
You know, to this day, I still have never had a pie that measured up to my grandmother's. The closest was Jean Holcomb. I don't know if any of you know Jean.
Yeah, the principal at Franklin.
No, not Jean. No, that's a different one. That was Ray.
Oh, that's
It's
Mr.
Jean.
Holcomb.
Jean, she was married to Dale Holcomb, who ran the IGA downtown
Oh,
for
okay.
many years. And Jean had a great pie, but I'm sorry, Grandma's was the best.
Well, I had the privilege yesterday of having lunch with all my sisters.
Oh, nice.
And one of them brought along my mother's memory book of Christmases.
Oh,
And it was really fun to look at the pictures of all of us sitting around the Christmas tree and excuse me.
Yeah.
Tell me more about Mormon Christmases, Brian.
You know, one of the other
There-
things my family has started to do was to, we all get together, my brothers and sisters, and bake Christmas cookies. And from using my mother's recipes, and it's a really nice get together, you know, just a few weeks before Christmas.
Very good. Thank you, folks. I appreciate it.
thank you.
Sorry about my inability to speak.
That's okay.
Man.
Happens.
Well, everyone.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.